Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third workshop conducted by TCS for the CIMA Management Case Study examination happening in February 2025. So we are closer to the exam with just 2 weeks ahead. In today's workshop, we will focus on P2 syllabus areas, and we will also discuss a mock exam task to understand how an E2 area could be tested in your examination. So the plan for today will be to discuss some general feedback coming from the latest round of marking. So this is mock 4 and mock 5. Some of our candidates have attempted the mock exam. So I thought I will share some feedback on it. We've actually given individuals shortcomings in the feedback document, but I thought it might be somewhat helpful if I could share the screen and highlight certain issues. And this will be followed by the E2 syllabus overview, and there will also be a discussion on an E2 task. And then, of course, I will open up the session for a Q&A where you can raise any question that you have pertaining to E2 or any other topic relating to MCS. All right. Let me also remind you about the last workshop, which will be held next week. So we are looking at Sunday, and a reminder that this would be in the morning. The reason being, it's actually the examination week, and we don't want you to stay awake at night and tune in for the webinar. So we would like to have it in the morning, and this workshop would be about managing the exam stress and managing the exam day, as well as making sure all what you have prepared is channeled properly and delivered properly in the examination. So do join for the final workshop as well. All right, this is the general feedback coming from the latest round of marking. Actually, all mock exams have been marked except for maybe one or two, which would have come very recently. I want to highlight a few things. One of the issues that I noted in certain scripts is very generic explanations. For instance, today, when I was marking a script, the script was referring to resources. The term resources was used in the answer, but there was no specification of what exactly the resources are. So when you say, this new project will involve resource management, what resources are you talking about? Just be specific. You are coming up with a response to your superior. So just consider yourself at your workplace and you are responding to an email. Wouldn't you be specific as to which resources? Are you talking about financial resources or human resources or technological resources? What exactly are you referring to? So remember, your responses must be specific and must be helpful to your superior or the board of directors to take action. So this is often seen in questions. Now, for instance, today, we would be looking at mock exam 2, and we would be discussing an E2 task in terms of mock exam 2. So your answers, now, for instance, let me talk about the task that we would be discussing today, right? So this is on an HR issue. So when you're discussing an HR issue, when you're advising the management, your advice should be actionable, right? You can't simply say, when we treat the employees well, they will respond, nicely to us. They will be motivated. Don't write generic explanations. This is a professional examination. Understand the issue. Make sure the points, the response is actionable. It's immediately actionable. Don't be vague with your explanations. Some candidates think, look here, I'm not sure about what exactly the recommendation or the advice or the point should be. So I'm going to try my luck with very generic explanations, and I'm going to leave it to the marker to interpret and award me based on my generic explanations. I'm so sorry. Things don't work that way. So if you're talking about resources, specify what those resources are. And if you're talking about human resources, okay, which human resources are you referring to? Are you referring to managers or are you referring to staff members? Be specific so that your points are relevant. Moreover, it was also observed sometimes the explanations are theoretical. For instance, please do not take any offense if this is your script. I'm not going to show the names of the candidates, but you will see we had a task on network diagram, right? So the answer, as you can see, it goes in the form of bullet points, right? This could be maybe an exact copy paste of our recap notes, right? Now, this is not going to help your superior because the question is how a network diagram can assist in optimizing our workflow from order processing to final installation. And you are giving a response to your superior. Okay, here's what I know about a network diagram. How do you think your superior will find this helpful? Yeah, right. There is absolutely no use for your superior if you come up with a generic explanation such as this. So please make sure that if you are referring to theory, the theory is applied to the given context. In other words, application is demonstrated in your responses. If you are writing an answer which doesn't have any application to the scenario, that means you are not going to score a pass mark for that particular subtask. So please be mindful of this. And there was the other extreme where candidates had gone full-fledged practical responses. There was no explanation of what was a network diagram. There was no application to as to how the network diagram will help us in optimizing our workflow from order processing to final installation. It was very generic explanation. That is also unhelpful because your superior is asking you, look here, can you explain how the network diagram is helpful, right? So you have to make sure you strike the ideal balance of explaining the technical concept and then demonstrating application to the given scenario. Right. Moving on, it was also observed that there was lack of professional language being used. When reading some of the answer scripts, I get the feeling as though I am reading a page on the website because some candidates, tend to write, you are required to, right? It's very unprofessional sometimes because you have to understand it's an examination answer, but at the same time, you are responding to your superior. So then you basically say that if you apply this, you will get this, right? So don't write as though you are replying to someone who is unknown to you, right? And sometimes the language is too basic. You don't say this will involve a lot of money, right? This is not how someone at the management level, a finance manager, is required to communicate with the board. What do you mean by a lot of money? You have to be specific and you have to be professional when you are referring to a funding or a cash requirement. So please be mindful as to how you will respond. Make sure that you are not using spoken language or you're not using language which does not appropriately convey the idea. This is not to say that your English should be advanced or your English should be sophisticated. No, your English should be appropriate, right? So that your points don't get lost when the marker is reading through. So please read through our suggested answers. Please see how the explanations have been phrased so that you will be able to understand, okay, this is how I am also supposed to write. Now, candidates receiving feedback where I comment on articulation. Now, if I'm commenting that the point is good, that means it's solid. That's the best you can do. Sometimes I comment satisfactory, which means it's okay, right? Sometimes I comment it's appropriate. So that's a valid point. Okay, that's a valid point that has relevance. Sometimes I comment acceptable, meaning not great, but it's okay. right? And sometimes I would say, look here, you have an appropriate point. You have the correct point, but your articulation, how you have explained the point is not satisfactory. So that could limit the marks that you get, right? Because remember, each of your subtask answers are read fully. So how the marking process works, this was covered in one of our earlier workshops. So what we do is, now say for instance, one particular subtask. The marker is supposed to read the entire answer. And the marker has to decide based on a scale of level 1, 2, and 3, where your answer ranks, right? So if your answer is ranking in, say, 1, 2, or 3, then in that scale also, you have to decide whether it is at the higher end of the scale or at the lower end of the scale. So when we look at our marking, when we award marks, we are firstly looking at, does this answer for the subtask meet the pass standard, which means 54%. So we firstly decide that, and then if it meets the 54% threshold, in that level, in that range, we see whether your answer falls into the higher range or the lower range, right? So that is how we actually go about the marking. That is exactly how CIMA also goes about the marking. So please refer to this success percentage weightings that we are giving. And if you score above 54, we will highlight that in green, right? So unfortunately, yes. Now, as you can see, this candidate's response, there is one response in which the candidate has been able to score 67%. Right? So that means it's meeting the pass standard, and it's actually, somewhere in the higher range of the marks. So please make sure that you are aware of how the marking is carried out, and your answers should convince the marker that you deserve a pass for the response. So the marker will read the entire answer and then will decide, okay, where to rank your answer, and within that rank, within that level or category, whether you fall into the higher range of the marks or the lower range of the marks. So use professional language. That is to say, use appropriate financial terms and use appropriate professional language. And it was also observed that sometimes some answers are in bullet form. Now, let me remind you, we provide two study resources. We provide the suggested answers. So as you can see, this is the suggested answers document. Now, the responses here are what you are expected to provide in the examination. Points explained in paragraphs. This is how the examiner's published suggested answers will also look like, right? We also provide an additional document, which we refer to as the answer plan. Now, this answer plan is intended to provide you with a breakdown of the key points that we have covered. Now, sometimes in your answers, you cover these key points. If you see my comment, correct, but must be articulated better, or I say appropriate point, valid point, but must be articulated better, or must be articulated more clearly or comprehensively, then I am saying, look here, you have a point which is correct. You will find the same thing in our answer plan, but in our suggested answers, we have explained that point clearly, comprehensively. We have explained it in such a way that you gain full marks for the point, right? So it is one thing to know the correct points, the correct responses. For instance, if you take risks and mitigation, it is one thing to know what are the risks. And it is another thing to appropriately explain, articulate that risk. And then the mitigation strategies. Okay, you know what the mitigation strategy should be, but you should make sure it is appropriately conveyed in your final answer. So we initially provided only the suggested answers document. We had come up with mock exams and we provided the suggested answer. So a candidate is reading through the suggested answer. As you can see, debt finance. There's an entire paragraph. Now the candidate is thinking, okay, what is the key point here? What's the key takeaway from this? Where is the essence? of the paragraph, that is what we provide to you in the answer plan. So you refer to the answer plan, you have the points that you also should have covered. You may have articulated it differently, but as long as you cover the same points, you have a good chance of passing the examination. So as you can see, I've said debt, and then we've talked about the pros. So these are the two key points. And these two key points are here in this paragraph, right? The first paragraph. So a candidate is able to understand, okay, these are the 2 points that have been elaborated in this paragraph. This is what I'm going to do. So please make sure that your final outcome is in alignment with this, right? It was also observed some candidates, they just copy paste the subtask headings into your answer script. Now, for instance, don't take any offense. As I said, I will show a few samples. Now, this is not going to go well with your marker, right? Because you're simply copy pasting what is there. This is not how you will respond to your superior. See how we have worded it. Basically, you can use, so what we do is we also copy paste, but we don't use the verb advise or analyze, because that is the instruction to us. When I respond to the superior, I can't tell him to analyze or I can't tell him to advise. So just be mindful of what you are making your marker read, because you have to win the confidence of the marker that you are a candidate who is prepared, who knows what you are doing, and who deserves a pass, right? And another issue that I observed today in an answer script, which I'm still marking, it is taking longer than usual because the candidate, each and every sentence, there's a typographical error. Each and every sentence. Now, typographical errors are understandable. There is no autocorrect in the exam platform. The reason being, CIMA does not want you to be worried about a red color, underline popping up, and thinking about, have I got the spellings right? Because there is UK spelling, US spelling, either is fine. So to avoid distractions, the autocorrect option is not present in your examination platform. Now, this doesn't mean that you have the freedom to write whatever you want, disregarding the typographical errors. A typographical error in every sentence, and these typographical errors were making it hard for me to read and understand what was written. And I'm anyway supposed to read because I am a marker, and I as a marker marking the mock exam will have to read, because we have this policy of reading each and every paragraph, and we will comment on each and every paragraph. So I will put the time and effort to, find out the missing pieces in the puzzle. I will try to interpret what would have been the correct spelling. But I don't think your marker is going to be too nice to you and thinking, okay, this candidate has actually taken a don't care attitude. It's like, I don't care. I'll just type whatever I want. You figure out the typing errors. You correct my typing mistakes. You mark it and you make me pass. That's not going to be, unless you have two kind markers, don't expect favors from the markers, right? So here and there, spelling mistakes are acceptable. But if the marker feels that you have taken undue advantage, that you try to maximize time by completely ignoring the presentation and the spelling mistakes, then of course you may not you may not get the marks that some of your explanations might deserve, right? So please be mindful of that as well. The inherent typing mistakes, spelling mistakes are acceptable, but please don't demonstrate an attitude to the marker that I really don't care about what I type, as long as I type as much as I can, because quantity is one thing, quality is another thing. You have to strike a balance between both. Moving on, it was So as I was telling, sometimes the answers are in a bullet point, like, two brief answers. Points need to be sufficiently explained. If you're explaining a risk, you can't explain a risk in a sentence unless it's a very lengthy sentence which spans to a paragraph where you actually give a clear justification as to why you consider something to be a risk. So please be mindful of the appropriate balance in the content. So always remember, you are expected to take 2/3 of your time typing the answers. And it is recommended that you have a typing speed of minimum 20 words. Minimum, that's minimum. And you should never try to, look at the minimum requirement. You have to actually increase. So 2/3 of the time would mean 30 minutes for typing. And if you are typing the minimum, even if you type the minimum, there should be 600 words in your answer script. We encourage candidates to write something in the range of 650 to 700. In fact, we've observed candidates scoring higher marks tend to write something closer to 700. So you have to understand, okay, this is the content that is expected. And then when you see the mark breakdown, you have to understand, okay, risks and mitigation, I will have to write, say, 300 to 325 words. And then you decide, okay, one paragraph that I write tends to take 40, 50 words. So in that case, I would be writing 6 paragraphs. So if I'm writing 6 paragraphs, I'll write 3 risks and I will write 3 mitigation strategies. 6 paragraphs comes to 300 to 325 or 350 words. So these were briefed by Nick in our answering technique webinar. So in case if you had missed it, please do revisit the webinar to understand how you should be allocating the time and how you should be determining the word count, the answer content, because always remember, you need sufficient content to pass a subtask. So these are from the most recent round of marking. We have 2 more mock exams to go. In fact, some have actually attempted mock 5, but please wait till you receive feedback on one mock exam before you attempt the next one. It's only then you can see some improvement from one mock to the other, right? The process is not focused on simply doing all the tasks, but it is focused on continuous improvement, as you would have learned in P2. Right, so that's about some general feedback, and I see some questions coming up on the chat. I will take them up in the Q&A session, so please um, give me time for that. And the E2 syllabus overview. Now, I would like to take you through the syllabus coverage in our mock exams, and that is also where we will actually see the breakdown of the entire syllabus. And I'm getting a question. Yes, you can allocate 1/3 of the time for reading and planning the answer and 2/3 of the time for typing the answers. Now, this is not a hard and fast rule. You are flexible doing that, but minimum duration of typing must be 30 minutes. If you can read and plan your answers in 10 minutes, that's great. And just get more content in your answers in that case, right? All right, so here we are with the syllabus coverage document. So I've been referring to this in the last 2 workshops as well, and we will move on to E2. Right, now here's the advantage with E2. For those who are coming through the gateway or exemption route, you will find E2 content more accessible, and you might also see some familiarity with the content, the syllabus in E2, right? Because most of your other programs, you would have covered these topics as well, right? But it is definitely an advanced managing performance syllabus for E2. So how we've broken down the syllabus here is slightly different from how you would see, but there are 3 main syllabus areas, right? So there is business models and business ecosystems. That is one of the 3 main areas in the syllabus. Then you have project management, managing projects. That's another syllabus component. And then you have managing people. So this is the breakdown of the syllabus. And let's focus on the key topics that you should be thorough with under each of these syllabus areas. All right, first things first, business models. So remember, Shinyglas's business model is something that you should be familiar with as you face the exam. So I would suggest you remember the key points from each element in Shinyglas's business model, because if you are presented with a question, task on business models, then you are expected to explain what is the current business model is like for Shinyglas. And thereafter, you will consider analysis. So please go with preparedness, the key points under each of these elements. Now, you can refer to the pre-scene in the examination, but we never recommend candidates to prepare in such a way that during the 3-hour window, they have to keep referring to the pre-scene for points which they could have gone prepared. So you can refer, but it would not be an effective use of the time because you received the pre-scene. Now, candidates preparing for the exam in February, you received the pre-scene in September, last week. So you've had so many weeks in preparation of the examination. So remember the key points and don't waste your valuable time in the examination trying to find out information from the pre-scene. And this has been a frequently tested area. Okay, be thorough with all 4 elements of Shinyglas's business model. We've had sittings where 4 out of the 6 variants had a question on business model. So that is how important the area of business models are. And please be prepared with regard to business ecosystems. You won't be expected to take a theoretical view, right? It's basically a practical question that you would be faced with. And I would suggest you to refer to our mock exam task on business ecosystems because we've taken the exact approach from a past variant task. Right, I'm also getting a question. Will the pre-scene enclose in the exam? Yes, you will have access to the pre-scene. A PDF version of the pre-scene will be available, but please prepare in such a way that you will not have to refer to the pre-scene document in the examination. Moving on, disruptive technology, a highly relevant area for Shinyglas as well. In fact, we've actually covered one of these in our mock exams. As you would remember, we were looking at a task which was about manufacturing smart glass windows. And this is actually mock 4. Those who have attempted will realize that is disruptive technology. And we actually had you covered in that task. So if you actually attempted the mock, went through the suggested answers, that means you have some idea about how disruptive technology can be tested in the context of Shinyglas. And data analytics. So we've had a question on business intelligence in the past. There could be questions on big data analytics. So please be prepared because for all businesses in the modern context, data analytics is a useful tool and definitely something that the examiner could test in your examination as well. Moving on, project management. Remember, these are the key topics under project management. You should be thorough with project life cycle. So as you know, there are 2 different models when it comes to project life cycle, the 5-stage approach as well as the 4-stage approach. Now, once again, this is something we've covered in our mock exam. So be thorough with both the life cycle stages because sometimes we've had a situation where the examiner had specified to use the 4-stage approach. So sometimes the model will be specified to you. So it is better to be prepared and it is better to be aware of what should be considered during each of these stages so that your response in the examination is appropriate based on the suggested model. And the project constraints, remember time, cost, quality, and scope, but please do not take a theoretical approach towards answering an exam question. This was evident in some of the answers in mock 4. If you look at the project management question, that resembles a past variant task. And if you compare our answers for that question, you will see that we discussed project constraints, but we did not take a theoretical approach. We made sure that we explain project management in a practical and relevant context. And project management tools. Now, those who are coming through the gateway route, I would urge you to focus on the project management tools topic, because there are some technical models here. For instance, network diagram. You either know it or you absolutely have no clue about it. And in fact, network diagram was tested in one of the past variants. And during that session, there was an attachment as well, and the candidates had no clue what that attachment meant. So if there is a reference to a project management tool, you should have a basic idea about what is the purpose of the tool, because each project management tool is aimed at assisting the project manager manage the different project constraints. It could be a tool to manage time, it could be a tool to manage quality, it could be a tool to manage cost, or it could be a tool to manage the scope. So you will need to know what are the different tools that can be used to manage the project constraints. So please be prepared, and do not be too worried about tools such as Prince2 or project management body of knowledge. You won't see very theoretical, or highly technical tasks. That's not what we've seen in the past variants, but you should have some idea about what the particular tool is all about. Project stakeholders, something that could be tested from a very practical perspective. So don't write theoretical responses. The stakeholders of a project uh, de depend on the specific nature of the project given to you in the examination. So one good thing about E2 is that you have scope for scoring marks without knowing much technical points. So even project management, if you take our mock exam 4 task, a candidate who had no idea about what project constraints are, the candidate could still score high-end pass marks. In the range, you could score the highest possible marks, because project management is practical. Each project is unique, each project is different. So while there are project management techniques, approaches, models, it's all about managing the project on the field, and it's all about making sure you manage the time, the cost, the quality, as well as the scope. So you don't need to know all the technical models and stuff there are to be able to successfully manage a project. Moving on, managing people, let me remind you that your variant is definitely going to have one of these topics tested. You are a finance manager, and each of the variants will assess your people management skills. And how we could assess your people management skills? Well, there's a broad range of topics to choose from. It could be a question on leadership, and we observe one problem with responses to a question on leadership. We set a question on leadership in mock exam 4, and most of the candidate misunderstood the requirement, and they came up with sometimes theoretical responses, or they started to explain all the leadership theories. Just be practical. The leadership theories help us understand what is an appropriate leadership style. But have you in your workplaces, discussed when there are problems with managers, when there are problems with leaderships? Have you had situations where your boss comes and says, "Can you tell me what is the leadership style followed by this manager so that I can take appropriate action?" No, you don't get very theoretical where you try to label someone's leadership style as, okay, this is autocratic. Okay, these are the advantages of autocratic leadership. These are the disadvantages. Don't take a theoretical approach. If you sense that it is a leadership style which is recognized, you can make mention of it, but don't get into a theoretical discussion of the leadership style. And of course, negotiation. This was one of the tasks in mock 1, the free mock exam that is available. In fact, the suggested answer is also available. And Nick actually took you through a task on negotiation when answering technique was discussed few weeks back. So please refer back to it. You will see that once again, negotiation has to be approached practically. Your conceptual knowledge of the 4 stages of negotiation helps, but you have to be able to apply the 4 steps to a given scenario. And conflict resolution, right? Don't worry, you don't have to study any conflict resolution methods. If you are presented with a conflict resolution task, just put yourself in the manager's position, be practical, and advise as to how you can resolve the conflict at hand. So there is nothing that you are expected to write from a theoretical perspective or from a research perspective. Of course, E2 suggests different approaches to managing conflicts. But if you look at examiners' answers, you will see that it is not a must for you to cite or use these conflict resolution methods to be able to score a pass mark. Health and safety really important because remember, we are a manufacturing organization. We manufacture double glazed windows and doors, and health and safety is something that we have to take seriously. And remember, we would be dealing with some hazardous materials, and we use machinery in the process. So there could be problems pertaining to health and safety, and there could also be disciplinary actions that need to be taken. So today's mock exam task combines both these areas. So we are examining health and safety as well as disciplinary action. And moreover, those who have been doing mock examinations will realize each mock exam will definitely have a people management related task. So we are actually examining these areas across our 6 mock exams. So if you're actually working on the 6 mock exams as per the study plan, do not worry, we've got you covered. And managing teams, once again, a practical approach is needed to go to talk about the stages of forming teams and, all of that. There could be a question on high performance teams that has been typically the focus when it comes to team management. And the wrong approach would be to, get into the definitions and features or the qualities of a effective team. Your superior is not interested in knowing your theoretical knowledge about what do we mean by a high performance team, what are the characteristics of a high performance team. What he would want to know is, look here, we have a problem. Our team is not performing well. How can we make this team become a high performing team? So you have to provide practical suggestions to make the team become a high performing team. Communication, once again, another open-ended task that you would be presented with. Don't talk about, communication, the process, the sender, the receiver, the message. Please don't get theoretical. You would be fortunate if you get a question on communication, and just make sure that it is practical and relevant considering the scenario. And there could also be issues pertaining to motivation of the staff members, right? So if you really look at this list, the mostly tested areas are actually at the top of the list, and the least tested areas are at the bottom. So you will see topics like communication, motivation. They are not too difficult in comparison to maybe resolving a conflict or dealing with a disciplinary action or health and safety issue. So you can be practical, just understand the causes for demotivation in a given scenario and see how you can address the demotivating factors and how you can increase motivation. So once again, you don't have to worry much about motivational theories or, don't worry about Herzberg theory X, theory Y. We use that knowledge at the workplace. We do understand that there are these hygiene factors and motivational factors, but you hardly find a work environment where you are called for a meeting and then you are asked, okay, can you apply Herzberg's theory and can you list out the hygiene factors and motivational factors, right? So rather than the model's names, it's important that you make practical use application of the model. And of course, you need to understand the differences between responsibility, authority, and delegation. So remember, you can delegate your authority, you can have a subordinate, you can delegate work. That is what you face in the examination. Always the senior finance manager or the finance director is sometimes delegating work to you. But remember, the ultimate responsibility lies with the person with the job description. So your superior, whatever work is delegated to you, still remains responsible to his superior for the work that was entrusted to him. So not often we see responsibility, authority, and delegation issues being tested, but it has also been tested, and it could be a possible area under managing people. So that's basically a summary of the E2 syllabus areas. We've organized it slightly differently from how you would see it in the blueprint as well as in the syllabus published in the CIMA materials. All right, so let's move on to the next half of our webinar, where we would be focusing on an E2 related task. So I'm going to refer back to the same mock exam that we used for our discussion last week. So as you would remember, we were discussing about expansion, and it was all about increasing the capacity, manufacturing capacity. And we actually had a discussion on investment appraisal techniques. So as you move on, you will find a task in section 3, which relates to, people management. And as I said, it combines both health and safety as well as disciplinary action. Okay. So section 4, I'm sorry, it's section 4. In section 3 also you have an E2 related question. As you can see in section 3, actually, in this mock, we are discussing about the possibility of Shinyglas recruiting full-time salespeople, and its impact on business model was discussed in section 2. And as you go to section 3, we come up with a situation where we are saying, no, we are not going to hire full-time people, but we are going to revise the remuneration scheme. How we are going to reward the salespeople would be different. And the task was set in light of you having to evaluate the proposed changes to the reward scheme and to provide your suggestions on how the reward scheme can be improvised. And as you move on to section 4, we've set you a task with regard to health and safety. So we'll read through section 4. As we start, we are told that 2 months have passed and today's date is 30th September 2025. So that's the financial year end. That's the financial year end. And why we've taken you towards financial year end is because we have tested the IFRS 15, revenue from contracts with customers. And the first section of the email is in relation to the F2 related task. So we will skip that part and we will move on to the part relating to the E2 requirement. So we are told, secondly, an unfortunate incident has taken place in our factory. Please refer to the forwarded email from the production director. So let's read through the email first and then the subtask. All right, so this is coming from the production director, and this has been sent to the finance director, which has in turn been forwarded to us. Right. Hi, Nathan. An unfortunate incident occurred at our factory following the implementation of a new process in the UPVC frames manufacturing. So as I said, we have a manufacturing facility, so we are exposed to health and safety hazards. So employees were informed that safety gloves must be worn whenever the new machines are in operation. This directive was communicated by the process supervisor, Jonathan Archer, to the 12 employees working on the process on the day of the implementation. So we have carried out the briefing, and the supervisor's name is also mentioned here. However, one of the senior employees, Mark Wembley, was absent during the day of the briefing. After Mark returned to work, he was seen operating the machines without wearing safety gloves. And this behavior was reportedly followed by other employees. So this happens at the workplace, you tend to imitate what the others are doing. So they saw that this guy wasn't wearing the gloves, and the others seem to follow suit, because if it's uncomfortable sometimes, or if you're overconfident, you tend to ignore the health and safety protocols. Few days back, while operating the machine, Mark suffered minor burns to his hand and required hospitalization. During the investigation, Jonathan was blamed. Jonathan was blaming Mark. Sorry, so there was a small typographical error here. It's either Jonathan blamed Mark or Jonathan was blaming Mark, that he was clearly at fault for working without wearing safety gloves. Obviously, this is the employee, remember, who was absent for the briefing, and he joined the next day and he was working without safety gloves, and he was the one injured and the one who required hospitalization. So Jonathan, who is the supervisor, he was blaming Mark that he was clearly at fault for working without wearing safety gloves. Now that's correct, because it's your job to wear the safety gloves. So he is at fault for not complying with the health and safety protocol. Mark, however, claimed that Jonathan did not brief him on the safety precautions and was not present to the was not present, okay, to supervise the process. So there are two allegations here. One is that he did not brief him on the health and safety precautions. Of course, uh, in the supervisor's defense, we could argue that, look here, he did the briefing, but you were present on that day. And when you reported to work the next day, you would have seen that the other 12 employees would have been wearing safety gloves. And as an employee, you are supposed to inquire what went down the previous day, and you have to take steps to make sure that you catch up and you are up to date with what was the new process and the protocols. So there, of course, we have some defense for the supervisor, but he also makes another allegation that the supervisor was not present to supervise the process. So, by definition, if you're a supervisor, you ought to supervise the process, you ought to supervise your subordinates, and you seem to have not been there. So that, of course, allegation, which will need to be considered further. So we are told that the director is willing to meet us in person to discuss further, but let's focus on what we are expected to do. Analyze what has gone wrong with regard to the incident in the factory. So it's an open-ended task. Analyze what has gone wrong with regard to the incident in the factory. Well, when I read it, I got the feeling that there were so many things that have gone wrong. Not one, but so many things that have gone wrong. And in my answer planning stage, that's what I'm going to consider, right? What has gone wrong? Well, one thing, you can look at it from the supervisor's perspective, and the other thing is you can look at it from the subordinate's perspective. And there is also a third party here, that is the other employees. So, everyone is at fault in some way. There is some wrong. Each of them has committed in some way. And the requirement goes on. And advice. Okay, so there's a conjunction and you have to be very careful. This means there's a sub-requirement, advice on how we should go about the disciplinary process. Okay, so firstly, we have to explain what has gone wrong. And in my answer planning stage, I'm going to plan what has the supervisor done wrong, what has the subordinate Mark Wembley has done wrong, and what has been done wrong by the rest of the team members. So that's going to be my first half of the answer plan. As you will see, I've actually followed the same approach in my answer plan. I will start with a brief introduction. Okay. Here we are. Okay. Right. So the first half is about analyzing what has gone wrong with regard to the incident. And as you can see, I have an introduction, and then I look at it from the perspectives of the injured employee, right? The other employees, and then the supervisor. So this came to my mind right away because I realized that, everyone is at fault in some way. And then I shouldn't forget, I have a sub-requirement, how we should go about the disciplinary process. I'll make sure I have a heading separately for that. And from E2, I've learned that there are certain steps to be followed when handling disciplinary issues. So that's how I will plan my answer. And let me remind you again, the answer plans that we give you are more comprehensive, are more detailed for the purpose of discussion. We have master classes, pre-recorded discussions of each and every subtask, just like how I am discussing. So when I screen share and when I share the answer plan, you will see a detailed answer plan of this nature. That is for clarity, but you are in the exam not expected to develop such lengthy answer plans. You can't. It's perfectly fine if you are capable of developing the answer plan in your mind, but at least in your answer plan, you should have had these headings. I'm going to talk about the injured employee. I'm going to talk about the other employees. I'm going to talk about the supervisor. And then I'll talk about the steps to be followed in the disciplinary issues. So this is a sketch of how I'm going to go about the answer. Right. Now, let's start with an introduction. How are we going to start the answer? Well, firstly, I will state that the nature of the issue here is health and safety breaches and how we should undertake the disciplinary action in the context of the health and safety breaches, right? So I would explain that right away so that I'm clear as to what I'm going to discuss in my answer. And then it is advisable to say that any handling of disciplinary actions, it must comply and it must be consistent with established organizational policies. So remember, we have an HR department at Shinyglas, and we have to make sure that we comply with the protocols and the policies set out by the HR function. All right, so let's see what has gone wrong with regard to each of the three categories of employees here. Firstly, the injured employee. I hope you will agree that as a senior employee, right? As a senior employee, he must be more responsible and he should have inquired about the instructions given upon returning to work. This is something that any individual, any employee is required to do. So he should have inquired and he should have complied with the instructions. And the problem we have here is he seems to have taken no effort, right? He does not seem to have inquired and he does not seem to have complied with the instructions anyways. So clearly, employee is at fault for non-compliance. I mean, come on, you are a senior staff member. You can't simply blame it on the supervisor. Look here, if you were here, I would have worn the gloves. Yeah, this looks like a schoolboy excuse. And the other employees, they received the formal briefing, so there is no excuse for them. They can't say we weren't aware of the instruction, but they have explicitly ignored the instructions. And this could be because sometimes some gloves that you wear may be not very comfortable, and employees tend to not wear them throughout the day. So it could be a case where the employees have chosen or preferred comfort over safety. And they are clearly at fault for non-compliance. They have absolutely no excuse. And if they had any concerns with the quality of the gloves or any other concerns, they ought to have raised it with the supervisor. And there is no indication of any such conversation happening with the supervisor, because remember, ultimately the company is responsible for the health and safety of the employees. So the blame comes to the supervisor and the company, and it is therefore necessary that all the staff members comply. And with regard to the supervisor, well, we can't really blame him too much. But one thing, as I mentioned earlier, the supervisor has to take ultimate responsibility for the team that is working under him. So it's one of his responsibilities to supervise, perform random checks, check whether all the employees are adhering to the health and safety briefings and the protocols. So he has actually carried out the briefing, and he has failed to. He appears to have failed to supervise the process. We actually have to investigate. But if we had supervised, it wouldn't have come to this situation where all the other employees have also started to work without gloves. So it's an indication that he has failed to supervise, and that's why the others have also started to follow the same, behavior as Mark. So he has to take responsibility for that. And you could also say that he should have checked whether all his team members received the briefing or not. It's not to say that you have to come back the next day and call Mark and brief him separately. You could basically check how many are present that day, or you could just simply ask, anyone absent today. And maybe you could simply ask a team member, look here, when this guy comes to work tomorrow, it is your responsibility to brief him about this, because you will have team leaders there as well. So what I have stated in the answer is that I'm not going to say that, he has to come back and brief Mark, but his responsibility is to make sure that all employees receive the briefing, right? So there's a difference in how you explain the point, right? So that is what I want you to understand as little nuances. Because if you say, Jonathan, the supervisor, should have come the next day, he should have called Mark and he should have individually briefed. Yeah, supervisors don't really go through that process, right? Coming and checking on each and every employee. So he should have made sure, okay, guys, look here, whoever is absent, just make sure they receive the briefing tomorrow. And maybe you can, name someone responsible for that. So your responsibility is to make sure that everybody receives the briefing and that you supervise the process. So that's about what has gone wrong with regard to the three categories of employees, and how should we go about the disciplinary process. Well, at the outset, I'm going to say, because each of them has failed in different responsibilities, we will have to take action under all three of them. So the superior, the absent employee, and all the other staff, they have all failed with the protocols, and we have to consider them under the disciplinary process. And please don't misunderstand, when we say disciplinary process, we are not saying that we fire the employees. Okay, so this is where your E2 knowledge on disciplinary handling is extremely useful, because there is a series of steps that must be followed when you handle disciplinary issues. And this would start with an informal chat. The process. I'm explaining the process here, right? Bringing in some E2 technical knowledge. So when you notice an issue, when you notice a problem, when you see any non-compliance, the first approach, the first step is an informal chat, And following an informal chat, you need to give reasonable time and support, for instance, training to the employee to show improvement. We don't know whether this works in the real world. We know that it doesn't work in the real world. But if you are to advise as to how we should go about the disciplinary process to save us, to protect us from potential litigation from employees, well, this is the process that we should have followed, and HR is responsible for documenting the process also, right? So remember that. So first thing is, have an informal chat, reasonable time and support to show improvement. And moving on, we would observe the employee's behavior. And if the employee's unsatisfactory behavior continues, we will follow up with a verbal warning. That would be the second stage. And even after the verbal warning, if it still continues, we would go for written warnings. Some say one written warning is enough. Some say you have to give two written warnings. So we are giving them time. We are keeping them informed. Look here, the issue is still there. You have to improve. If you don't show any improvement, we will have to take action. So even after the second and the final written warning, if the behavior still continues, then you are eligible to suspend the employee pending the inquiry, right? So you can actually suspend them, and thereafter you need to have an inquiry to investigate whether the employee is at fault and whether the employee deserves a demotion or termination of employment. So these are the steps to be followed. Don't get too theoretical. If you look at our response, if you look at the suggested answer, we've actually kept this explanation very brief. We haven't gone into the details of explaining the 5 steps in 5 paragraphs. We've kept it for 1 paragraph because we understand, what's important is application. So if you look at this paragraph, okay, all these points, all these bullet points, right, steps to be followed, we've managed to explain them in 1 paragraph because we understand application is more important than theory. And in the paragraph that follows, we are looking at application. Okay, so the 3 categories of employees here, what would be the ideal response? So let's take one at a time. And firstly, if you look at the nature, it's a health and safety breach. It is a serious issue, right? Okay. And you have to see whether this is the first instance of Mark or whether the other employees have breached the health and safety protocol, right? So if it is the first time, then we have to give them the first warning, right? Because as I said, there's a sequence and you can't skip the sequence unless you are justified, unless the issue is serious enough for you to actually bypass a particular step. So what we would have to do is we have to see whether Mark, the injured employee, or the supervisor, right? That was Jonathan Archer, or whether the other employees, is this their first instance? If that is the first instance, then we would have to give them the first warning, right? And I'm suggesting, okay, it is acceptable if you suggest otherwise also, I'm suggesting considering the severity of the breach, rather than having an informal chat, right? Rather than having an informal chat, because we've had a situation where employees suffered a health hazard. The employee was injured, had to be hospitalized. And considering these circumstances, I would suggest let's straight away go with a written warning, because if you have an informal chat, it actually underscores the gravity of the breach, right? So that is why a written warning is more effective here and is justified here. At the same time, if this is not the first instance, if Mark had already received a first warning, or if he had received a final warning, or if any of these 3 categories of employees, if they are at a different stage in terms of handling the inquiry, maybe they were given a verbal warning, or maybe they were given a final warning. So, for instance, Mark had demonstrated this behavior earlier. So you check the HR records. He had received an informal chat. He had already received a verbal warning, written warnings. And in that case, you can even suspend Mark pending an inquiry, right? So it's all about understanding where in the sequence of the steps we find this breach applicable, and accordingly, we have to deal with the disciplinary action, right? So unfortunately, we don't have those HR records. That is with the HR staff. So we are going to say that, look here, consider the employee's records and see what is the appropriate action according to the sequence of dealing with the disciplinary issues. So that's basically our suggested approach towards the answer. I've been seeing some questions popping up in the chat, and I will open up the session for the Q&A, and I will also respond to the questions in the chat as I move on to the Q&A session. And before that, let me also remind you, of our success in the past exam sitting. So we achieve these pass rates thanks to the efforts of our candidates who trust our materials, trust the process, work hard enough, and we also push ourselves beyond the limits to help as best as we can. So I would suggest, if you're interested in choosing to partner with us, study with us, please do check out our study options in the website, and you will find the resources extremely helpful. All right, I'll pause the recording to facilitate the Q&A. So thank you very much for all the questions. I hope I was able to address them as best as I could. If you still have any questions, or if you need further clarification on the questions that were posted and the answers that were presented, please do feel free to reach out to us. So you can reach us out on WhatsApp for your convenience, or if you prefer, you can also contact through email. And please also keep tabs on the social media pages, especially YouTube and the TikTok videos. And the recordings are uploaded to the YouTube playlist as well. So thank you very much once again for attending yet another workshop. Hope you benefited from the workshop, and hope to see you in our final workshop next week. So it's very important that you don't panic closer to the exam. It's very important that you motivate yourself, and you remain confident leading up to the examination. So be confident, and don't look back about the time that has been lost, but optimize the upcoming 1.5 weeks in preparation of the exam, and we are confident that you all can pull this off. So thank you, and a good night to all of you.